I'll try. Thank you all for coming tonight. Please make sure you sign in. I can not there anymore. There is a nice young lady in the pink over there. Make sure you sign in and get your email address, and we can put you on the list, or haven't already. Let's see. So introductions. My name is Laura Arsenault. As I said, I'm the branch chief of the Heritage Resources section in Department of Planning and Development. I am pinch hitting for Denise Dressel, my colleague tonight. She's unwell. You might have noticed her during some of the worker meetings or other information for Homes Run Acres. So we are all doing our best to pull this together for you. But I'm really happy with the turnout tonight, and we'll move forward. So let me do some introductions. This is our first in-person meeting in 3 years. So at any point, if you can't hear me, can't see, please let me know. Just raise your hand and wave at me. Okay, so welcoming and introductions. I'll introduce our staff first, and then Supervisor Gross, I'd like you to come up and kick us off. Let's see. So Sarah Godfrey is here. She is the Communications Engagement Specialist, and we'll be talking about the poll later tonight. We have Sarah Bonish here. She's with our consultant, EHD Tracery. She's doing the design guidelines. We have Lily Yegazoo with the Zoning Administration Division. She will be telling us about the zoning ordinance amendment and the zoning a little bit later tonight. And thank you to other DPD staff that came. Megan Riley in the pink back there. Thank you, Megan. We have Grace Davenport, she's the planner too, with us. You might have seen her at some work group meetings. And we also have Jerome Bush, who very nicely ushered you in tonight. So Supervisor Gross, with that, if you wouldn't mind.
We're trying to make sure that, that the microphones work. Well, good evening. I'm Penny Gross. I'm the Mason District Supervisor. And this project is one that has been under the aegis of now 3 members of the Board of Supervisors. The original request was made in 2019 when Linda Smith, the Providence District Supervisor, brought it to the board. And then Linda retired from the board, and Dahlia Palchik then picked it up when she got elected in late 2019. And Dahlia ran with it for a while until January, when under redistricting after the census, the Woodburn precinct was cut off at the Beltway and added to Basin District. So that's how I sort of inherited this historic overlay district project. I have gotten a lot of emails from folks recently, and I want to assure you, several people have said, please vote no at the Board of Supervisors. It isn't nearly close to being on the board's agenda. There's still a lot of work to be done. So as you are listening tonight to the presentation, please make sure that you're aware that it is not going to the board anytime soon. We have to go through several more steps if it ever gets to the board. I can't tell you whether it does. We've only done 1 historic overlay district in Fairfax County, and that was Holland Hill a few years ago. So this is not on a fast track. It has been several years in the making, and I think there's still a lot of community consensus and community discussion that has to happen before it becomes something that goes to the board agenda. Just wanted to make sure you understood that. I also understand we're going to have a Q&A session at the end, so I'm hoping that everybody will jot down the questions so that we can take them at the Q&A, not during the presentation. So, thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Gross. We appreciate that. As Supervisor Gross said, I think this is going to be a 4-year project. Holland Hills was a 4-year project, and we're not looking at moving this forward to go to the Board of Supervisors until possibly early next year. So early 2023 is when it might be. So just walk through the agenda very quickly. I hope you picked up a copy at the beginning. It's also online for later on. We're going to talk about the background of Holmes Acres, and I will apologize now. If I say Holland Hills, I sincerely apologize. That was my project. So Holmes Acres and Holland Hills, we just had to pick two historic overlay districts that almost do the same thing, but here we go. But I will give some background presentation and some staff analysis and findings, and then we'll move forward with Sarah Vonish and design guidelines. We'll kick it over to Sarah Godfrey with the community poll, and then as Supervisor Gross mentioned, we'll do a Q&A at the end. Oh, and I apologize. I neglected to introduce some others at the beginning. So if you were on the Holmes Acres Historic Overlay District Work Group, if you could please raise your hand and do a wave. We worked with them throughout the last 2 or 3 years. We have Arvidas, I'm sorry, Mr. Arvidas Bardukas, David Heckman, Edith MacArthur, Keith Gardiner, Sarah Joblin, Nancy Gayron, and Matt Harris. So thank you for working with staff over the last couple of years. I also have a couple of members of the Architecture Review Board here tonight. I have Ms. Smith along. You wave and do your princess wave, everybody. I have Mr. Christopher Daniel, who's the chair of the ARB. And I might have some history commissioners, but I don't think they're coming. So they've all been working with us on this project for a couple of years. So let's move forward and talk about historical overlay districts. So what is a historical overlay district? It's a zone, yes. Is that better? So what is a historic overlay district? A historic overlay district is a zoning tool that promotes the general welfare through the identification, preservation, and enhancement of building structures, neighborhoods, landscapes, places, and areas that have historical, cultural, architectural, or archaeological significance. It's officially designated by the Board of Supervisors, and they prevent encroachment of new buildings or structures, and additions that are architecturally incongruous with the visual and historic character of the district. They promote the upkeep and rehabilitation of older structures, educate residences, and encourage preservation. They also ensure new development within the district is appropriate. We do have 15 existing historic overlay districts in the county. We have Holland Hills, and we also have Wellington at River Farm. If you're familiar with that, it was in the newspaper about 2 years ago now. So we are now up to 15. So location, I don't really need to tell you all the location because you know where it is, but at the intersection of Gallows Road and Interstate 495 inside the Capitol Beltway. And at the time, as Supervisor Gross mentioned, of the board authorization in January of 2020, it was in the Providence Supervisor District, but now it's in the Mason District. On January 24th, 2020, the Board of Supervisors authorized the consideration of comprehensive plan amendment for the Holmes Acres subdivision in the Jefferson Planning District. The board requested that staff's evaluation include analysis and recommendations on the historic and architectural significance, as well as boundaries for the potential creation of a historic overlay district. In addition to the potential comprehensive plan amendment, staff will also be drafting a potential zoning ordinance amendment, as well as a rezoning application for the addition of the historic overlay district, if approved by the board. So these two maps here, the map on the left is the National Register boundary outlined in red, and the map on the right is the study area boundary. The total number of parcels included in the study area was 366, and the total parcels in the study area was about 145 acres. I'm sorry, total acres was about 145. The site is currently developed with single-family detached housing, with the exception of Woodburn Elementary School, Laureate Park, and Holmes Acres Recreation Association, a private community recreation center. The adopted comprehensive plan for the area recommends 2 to 3 dwelling units per acre and the entire study area is zoned R3, which is residential 3 dwelling units per acre. No change to the planned land units or density is being proposed. A couple of additional properties were looked at and evaluated for inclusion in the change from the National Register to the proposed historic overlay district. There were a number of homes on Upper Executive Avenue and Gallows Road. There were some parcels adjacent to the Fairfax County Public Schools, and also the Holmes Acres Recreation Association parcel was added. Those are shown in the blue hashed area on the presentation. So one of the things that we're required to do in the analysis of a historic overlay district is to create a staff report. And in this report, we talk about the significance and the historic nature of the neighborhood. We also talk about current conditions that I just went over. We talk about character defining features. We look at and recommend contributing and non-contributing properties. And we also look at the boundaries as well as zoning ordinance regulations above and beyond the R3 zoning. So to establish an HOD, the board must determine the proposed district possesses historic, architectural, archaeological, or cultural significance. According to the National Register nomination in 2007, the Holmes Acres neighborhood has over 350 modern style suburban single family dwellings constructed between 1951 and 1958. The developers, brothers Gerald and Eli Luria, created a subdivision with affordable houses that took advantage of the natural terrain by blending homes into the surroundings. The Luria's hired architects Nicholas Satterley and Donald Lethbridge to design small, inexpensive houses consisting of standardized features. They designed houses to be affordable, quick to construct, and sited in harmony with the natural topography and landscape. Influenced by the principles of Frank Lloyd Wright's Usonian dwelling, the architects designed the houses in a modern style featuring open plans, plywood panels, fixed glass, sliding windows, in a time when the ranch and colonial revival styles were much more popular. The modern design of the dwelling includes large windows on the primary facade, shutter, low sloped gable roofs, and prominent brick chimneys. Holmes Acres was added to the county inventory of historic sites in February of 1977, the Virginia Landmarks Register in December 2006, and to the National Register of Historic Places in March 2007. Listing on all these registers is an honorary designation and does not offer conservation protection. November 2019 seems like a very long time ago, but here we are. So November 2019 is when we had the first community meeting with the neighborhood. And then the historic overlay district was authorized in January of 2020. Between September 2020 and June of 2022, we met with the work group 15 times. Then in March of 2021, we had a second community meeting, and then we're here tonight with the third community meeting. And then also, the big input from the community will be the community poll, which will be released next week, I believe, and run through September. So with the work group meetings, we reviewed defining features of the neighborhood, those characteristics I mentioned earlier, and discussed contributing and non-contributing properties and draft design guidelines. Staff during that time conducted site visits, researched the boundaries, contributing properties, and collaborated with the work group. So staff analysis and findings. When reviewing exterior projects requiring building permits and existing HOD, Architectural Review Board will use design guidelines for new construction, existing structures, the exterior alteration of existing buildings, structures, and sites, and for the installation of new utility facility applications within a historic overlay district, based on the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. These standards are written within the zoning ordinance regulating all historic overlay districts. The standards embody two important goals: the preservation of historic materials, and the preservations of a building's distinguishing character. Every old building is unique with its unique identity and own character. Character refers to all of those visual aspects and physical features that comprise the appearance of every historic building. Character defining features or elements include the overall shape of the building, its materials, craftsmanship, decorative details, interior space and features, as well as the various aspects of its site and environment. The work group has been helping staff to identify these features and elements and that give the district a distinct visual character that should be taken into account. Here's a list of the character defining features staff found in the National Register listing for the Holmes Run Acres. So there's the curvilinear road layout, the siting and building on the landscape, modern architecture design, windows and prolific use of facade materials, the roof shape, and large brick chimney. The work group in a similar fashion identified the additional features and supported the National Register nomination features, including landscape, the house orientation, mid-century modern style, the wood siding, and the low slope of roofs and picture windows. So staff went through each property and determined whether or not it was contributing or non-contributing, and this is the criteria we used to do that. We looked at if the property was contributing in the original 2007 National Register nomination. We looked at if there were any building permits or modifications to the property between 2007 and now. We looked at if the modification was completed within the period of significance, and if that modification retains defining characteristic as determined by staff. We also looked at if the modification diminished the historic integrity of the historic building according to the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. So with all of those taken into account, each property was determined contributing or not contributing. So as you can see on this map, there are 366 total parcels in Holmes Run Acres. 343 parcels were included in the boundary. 285 were recommended to be contributing, that's green on the map. 58 were recommended yellow, non-contributing, and that's in yellow on the map. And there were 16 changes from the National Register nomination to staff's recommendation. So we're going to be a little bit more administrative part of this. The first piece is the comprehensive plan amendment. It's a tool used for decision making. The comprehensive plan is required by state law to be used as a guide to decision making about the natural and built environment by the county's Board of Supervisors and others such as the Planning Commission and the Board of Zoning Appeals. It's also a guide for county staff and public to use in the planning process. Current language notes that the listing of Holmes Run Acres on the inventory of historic sites, the Virginia Landmarks Register, and the National Register. The proposed updates will be mainly editorial and will add the designation of historic overlay district if approved by the board. Now I'll turn it over to Lily Yegazu, who will talk about the background of the zoning ordinance.
Good evening, can you hear me? My voice is very soft. I'm Lily Gazu with the Zoning Administration Division. And as Laura mentioned earlier, the establishment of the Historic Overlay District requires some administrative components like the comprehensive plan amendment. But in addition to that, there's going to be a zoning ordinance amendment and a rezoning required. The zoning ordinance amendment will establish the HOD, and it will impose specific regulations that will be applicable to all properties within the HOD. The Holmes Run Acres neighborhood is currently zoned R3, and that's residential district, 3 dwelling units per acre. The lot and building dimensional standards for the R3 zoning district currently include these regulations, but not limited to these. A maximum height of 35 feet for detached single-family dwellings and 60 feet for all other principal structures. It also has a requirement that certain setbacks be met when a property is developed. There's a 30-foot front setback, 12 feet on each side, and 25 feet from the rear property line. Staff is proposing the following changes in the zoning ordinance amendment, which will primarily keep everything in the underlying zoning district, the R3 zoning district requirements, except reducing the height limit for all other structures to match the height limit for single-family dwelling, detached single-family dwellings that is currently at 35 feet. So staff is proposing to match that height limit for all principal structures. In addition, to establish a historic overlay district, one other change in the zoning ordinance would be that ARB with Architectural Review Board review and approval of building permits will be required for exterior changes. And that would be something that would be included in the zoning ordinance amendment. As far as the rezoning, because historic overlay districts are also zoning districts, there is a rezoning component that is required as well. And what that rezoning does, it does not change any use limitations or development standards, like I mentioned earlier, but it will create the boundary of the historic overlay district where the new regulations would be applicable. So the properties within that new boundary, as a result of this rezoning, will be subject to the regulations that may be included in the zoning ordinance amendment. The properties within the proposed historic overlay district then would become subject to the zoning regulations in the underlying zoning district and the additional regulations that are going to be proposed in the new HOD. The zoning ordinance regulation always has to be complied with. It's the regulatory aspect of the development, and there will be design guidelines that will be adopted as part of the establishment of the historic overlay district. That design guideline would be used by the Architectural Review Board, or ARB, in reviewing proposals that include exterior alterations or new constructions. This chart over here kind of gives a summary of what requires a building permit, for example, which would be subject to the Architectural Review Board review and approval. It includes new construction, additions, demolitions, pools, and more than 2,500 square feet of land disturbance.
You need to hold this right.
Can you hear me now? Better? Okay. The zoning ordinance regulations, as mentioned earlier, includes certain regulations and development standards like setbacks, building heights, fence height, location, and other development standards that are specific to redevelopment of properties. The design guidelines that will be adopted as part of the establishment of the proposed historic overlay district will include recommendations in how to be compatible with the neighborhood and the established historic overlay district. There are certain things that are exempt from review by the ARB. These are, for example, interior modifications, deeds and covenants of properties are not subject to review by the ARB, and property value as well. With that, I'm going to let Sarah Vanish, our consultant, go into detail about the design guidelines and give you additional information.
Hi, everyone. I haven't used a microphone in a while, so does keep cutting out. So I'm here tonight to present an overview of the draft design guidelines for the potential historic overlay district. If you haven't seen them already, they should be up on the website soon. I think we'll be talking about the poll after this. So they'll be available for your review and to provide questions, comments, and concerns. Here's just the agenda for my presentation. Again, my name is Sarah Bonish. I'm the Senior Historic Preservation Specialist and Project Manager with EHT Traceries. Laura Hughes, our principal, is also working on the project, but unfortunately couldn't make it tonight. As background, Traceries is a local, small, DC-based historic preservation consulting firm. We work we provide a wide range of professional services to both governmental agencies and private clients, including archival research, survey and documentation, regulatory compliance, and preservation planning. We've been working with the county for just about 3-4 years now on updating the existing historic overlay district design guidelines. So this has been part of that process, or in addition to that process, as well as Holland Hills and Wellington at River Farm, the most recent districts. So our goal from the outset of this project has been to create user-friendly design guidelines for use by applicants, staff, and the review board in order to promote the preservation and rehabilitation of Holmes run acres homes of the HOD. As I mentioned, we've been working on preparing updated overall and district-specific design guidelines throughout the county. Holmes Run Acres has been coordinated with that effort to provide a consistent, reliable outline and format. As part of this effort, we first reviewed existing documentation, including all of the materials collected by the community and on your community website, the National Register nomination, as well as others. We then performed an on-site survey like staff to inform our understanding of the neighborhood's character and the character defining features, and photos from that survey have been used within the design guidelines to illustrate treatments that are recommended. We worked with staff and attended regular work group meetings to present the draft design guidelines along the way and get input from the community. They've been revised based on those comments. And we're here tonight presenting the latest draft. We are moving forward. We'll continue to refine and revise the document based on the feedback we receive, and ultimately based on feedback from the Architectural Review Board. The guidelines are intended to be a comprehensive document providing background on the historical and architectural significance of the community, practical guidance to facilitate ARB review of future projects, and then recommendations for appropriate treatment strategies that maintain, strengthen, and enhance the mid-century modern character of the community. Important to note that the design guidelines are recommendations. They are not regulations or requirements. And I think we'll be repeating this over and over again. And they're not part of the zoning ordinance. Additionally, if the HOD moves forward, the guidelines are approved by the ARB and not the Board of Supervisors. So what guidelines can and cannot do? Again, they're recommendations, they're not requirements. They're intended to support the community's continued evolution while preserving its historic modernist character. They are not meant to be absolute, give case-specific advice, or address unique situations or conditions. And sometimes a creative, thoughtful design solution that may not fit neatly within the design guidelines will result in a better project and will be approved by the board. So what's in the draft design guidelines? This gives you an overview of the contents. I'm not going to go through each section. I'm going to focus on the design guidelines, but this is just to give you a picture of what's in there, starting with history and significance, character defining features, contributing and non-contributing elements, the kind of the summary of the analysis that staff did in preparing their staff report. There's also an appendix with additional resources. Okay, so the HOD regulations in the zoning ordinance identifies 12 review standards for use by the ARB in their review of projects. These 12 standards incorporate the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, which were developed by the National Park Service and are considered the benchmark for appropriate preservation practice. Fairfax County, like other local jurisdictions, use these standards in their review of projects. The standards provide a general framework and key principles that apply to historic buildings of all periods, styles, types, materials, and sizes to help preserve the distinctive character of a building and its site while allowing reasonable change to meet contemporary needs. So here are the 12 standards on the screen. I'm not going to read through each one of them, but we can come back during the section for questions. Okay, guidelines in chapter 4 of the document are organized based on 3 different project types. First section covers guidelines for preserving existing buildings, preserving and rehabilitating. The second section is for guidelines for new construction and additions within the HOD. And the final section is for preserving the setting, including topography, landscape, streetscape, and archaeological resources. Within each section, guidelines are shown as either recommended or not recommended. The work treatments that are consistent with the state review standards are recommended, and those that are inconsistent are not recommended. And you can probably barely see this, but that gives you an idea of the format of the report and how the recommended and not recommended treatments are outlined. So the first section on preserving and rehabilitating existing buildings addresses repair and maintenance of existing homes. Guidelines are divided by building elements and features, such as roofing, raw materials, windows, garages, and carports. And it also provides guidance for improving accessibility and sustainability in existing homes. Consistent with the standards, the guidelines outline a treatment hierarchy, beginning with basic repair actions and progressing to replacement in kind, which means you're matching the original in appearance and materiality. The guidelines also acknowledge that many of the original building materials used were mass-produced and prefabricated, and they may not be the most durable, and they may no longer be available on the market, which will require replacement with compatible alternative. The second section provides guidance related to the design of new constructions and additions. The guidelines in this section are intended to help project applicants design compatible new construction that complements the existing neighborhood character. For the standards, new additions or construction should be compatible yet differentiated. And this is somewhat subjective, and we've talked a lot about that in the work group. And in terms of compatibility, that just means that any addition or new construction should be complementary to the existing character of the existing building or the streetscape, the existing buildings within the HOD, especially in their massing, size, scale, and overall modernist character. And differentiated does not mean inharmonious. It instead aims to distinguish the old from the new, to protect the prominence and integrity of the original house. So there are various techniques to differentiate the new from old, including but not limited to slight variations in material or fenestration, or by incorporating small hyphens to separate the two masses. And this section, like the previous, provides guidance based on building elements and features, but more importantly, includes guidelines on siting and site design, size, scale, and massing, and then proportion and symmetry. And as we know, the natural character of the development, including the topography and the parks, streetscape, street patterns, and the relationship between buildings and their surroundings. It was a carefully planned element of the community. and strongly contributes to the setting and distinct character of the neighborhood. So the final section provides guidance for the landscape and streetscape to retain this character, providing recommendations for landscape design, fencing and privacy screens, driveways, and those sorts of elements. In addition, there is a section on information on how to appropriately approach archaeological resources if discovered. So we touched on this in the beginning of this presentation, but to recap, the guidelines are intended to be a comprehensive document as a guide for owners, occupants, design and construction professionals to learn about the history and significance of the community, look at photographs of character defining features and the original house designs, understand the ARB review process, and to learn about recommended and not recommended treatments. And they are also used by the ARB as they consider potential impacts of proposed projects on the historic and architectural significance and character of the HOD. And just to reinforce this point, the guidelines are recommendations and the ARB makes the final decision on a case-by-case basis, depending on the project and site-specific considerations. And I know we have board members that may be able to help answer questions on that, but with that, I'll turn it back over to you. Okay.
Okay, Sarah touched on this a little bit, but I'll go ahead and reinforce it one more time. The ARB approval will be required before a building permit can be issued and applies primarily to larger exterior renovations, construction, or demolition. So that would be the main change for a property owner within the historic overlay district. It does not apply to interior alterations. Existing renovations can remain, and the underlying zoning would remain in place. So this is a little small, so I'm sorry, but we'll post the PowerPoint presentation online as well. So what is a building permit required for and what it's not? That decision is ultimately made by Land Design Services in the building permit group. So we need to consult with them if a permit is needed. And then if it is needed, it would come to the ARB. So just a quick overview, a building permit is required for new buildings, additions, or structures, sheds and playhouses over 256 square feet, swimming pools, retaining walls over 3 feet, and demolitions of buildings and structures. The building permit currently is not required for fences, residential window replacements, door replacements, gutters, playground equipment, on-grade patios, and driveways. So that's just a very high-level overview of common types of building permits. So now I'm going to hand it over to Sarah Godfrey, and she will talk about the poll.
All right. You guys hear me? Okay, so the Civic Association asked the county for our help in putting together a poll. This is an important opportunity for you all to weigh in with your thoughts on the proposed HOD. So it will kick off Monday, August 1st at 12:01 a.m. Mark your calendars. And a postcard will go out next week with information about it. So don't worry about the link and any of that kind of stuff. And the link to the poll will also be on the study webpage. A couple other things. I will walk through the poll questions in a second, but a couple other pointers. As you probably realized tonight, if you hadn't already, there's a lot of pieces of information that go into the consideration of an HOD. And we've laid out, before you get to the poll, there are informational tabs that have all the information that you've heard tonight laid out. There's an FAQ, there's background information, there's a map, boundary map, there's a map with contributing and non-contributing properties. So really try to make it easy for you and kind of give you all the information in one place, and how hopefully that will help inform your decision of, you know, how you respond to the poll. So I can go to the next slide. So that leads us to the first question. And actually, before you get to this question, I should note that your name and your Holmes or an acre address are required to take the poll. And we also have an IP tracker kind of thing rigged in the poll. So to prevent duplicates, we're trying our best to prevent those. But the first question is gauging how informed you are. This really will help us know how well we are doing our job, and, you know, hopefully most of you feel very informed. Yes, anyways, that's your opportunity to weigh on there. The next question, the big one, do you support the HOD? I think that's pretty self-explanatory in terms of how you want to vote there. Next one. So you may have heard Lily talking about with the zoning regulations. In the typical regulation is for 35 feet, for homes to be up to 35 feet tall. And this is to gauge whether or not you all would consider an additional height restriction. This is something that would come after the adoption of an HOD. So this is just to gauge thoughts on additional restrictions. And then, the final thing is a comment box. You can put in any comments that you have, any concerns you have. This is, you know, obviously your opportunity to let us know your thoughts. So go to the next slide. Oh wait, I have a clicker, I'm sorry. Okay, so postcard, that will be hitting mailboxes next week. And yeah, this is what it will look like. So keep an eye out. There's a QR code. You can kind of hopefully see, there's QR code. There is an option to request a paper ballot if that's something that you would like. And there's also an option to request the poll in the language of your choice. That will require, you know, a few days turnaround. So a few other notes about the postcard. This goes into, so the QR code that you just saw, you can use to take it on to do the poll on your phone. The IEP address is what I was mentioning that we put in there to prevent duplicates. Let's see, paper ballots. We talked about that. I think we're good. All right, poll timeline. So like I said, we are finishing it up this week, doing a little testing, and it will go live on August 1st. And the poll will close September 9th. And then the poll results will be ready sometime in October. And
a question about the mailing. Are they being mailed?
We can hold all questions to the end. Sorry, if you don't mind. You hold some questions to the end. We're almost done. I promise. I have like 3 more slides. Thank you. So continuing on that, in September 2022, we will present to the Architecture Review Board, the History Commission, and the Park Authority staff findings. And then beginning of 2023, work on publishing the staff report and scheduling the public hearings for February and March. That's it. I had 1 slide. Sorry about that. So for questions, since we are trying to hear everybody, I would ask that if you would come up and I can give you the microphone here, and also your friends on Zoom can hear as well. So if you have a question, please come up, or I can repeat it up here. So, sir, go ahead.
About the poll, are those being mailed to the property owners or to the residents of HRS?
I believe they're being mailed to the property owners, so the owner listed on the tax record. Other questions? Sure.
Well, I have a few. Can I come up and ask?
Sure, of course.
Sure. My name's Andrea Hardy. I have lived here for 11 years at 3436 Gaddy Court. So it's on the corner of Gaddy and Surrey. We're one of the conforming houses. First question is, how often does the ARB deviate from the guidelines?
That's a great question. The design guidelines are recommendations, so they're just basic principles for forward. Each case is brought in a specific purpose, and they don't, it's a case-by-case basis of how they review. So they will use the guidelines in general, but they will take the whole account in the situation. For example, if you don't have the materials, the original materials, and they recommend wood in the design guideline, the ARB could recommend something as Trex instead, as long as it conforms with how it looks.
And that would be part of the package that you submit when you submit your proposal for to the ARB.
That's correct. That's correct.
What you need for a permit changes. So right now it says that there's not for fences, for example, that was just the first one listed. If that just changes, does that mean automatically that they would be subject to review by the ARB?
Yes, if they require a building permit, that's the criteria for when the ARB reviews it. There are some types of fencing that do require special permits for certain heights and locations, but right now, your fence, as long as it meets the zoning ordinance requirements, it is by right, you do not need to come to the ARB. However, I will caveat, the design guidelines do give guidance if you would like to take that into account.
Sorry, just two more. If you, so you do need a permit for some inside work. So we had a kitchen demolition, we needed a permit for that. So is there a guarantee that nothing inside will be subject to the ARB review?
If it's whole of the entire building permit is interior. So if you're changing a window or a door placement or how it can be seen from the outside, that would come to the ARB for review because that could change. So if you're doing like a refinish of basement, or you said modifying your kitchen and you're not changing placement of windows and doors, you would not need ARB review for that.
I'm a lawyer. I follow-up question. So does that mean then the only thing of the ARB and that would review would be the placement of the door or window, or are they going to get into the internal stuff as well?
It's only exterior.
Last question, I promise. It is the last question. So it's more about the poll, about is there a percentage that there is for either Supervisor Gross to move this project forward? I think it was 72% around that, which was the original to move the with the study forward. So are you requiring more, less? But if you could give us some guidelines on that. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. Supervisor Stork, would you like, Supervisor Gross, would you like to comment on that? Okay. The poll is totally for the community. The community has requested the poll, and we're gauging community interest. After the poll results come back, we will move forward on how to.
Okay, all right. So I'm not exactly 33.2 volts. So the poll itself is not really playing into the decision. This is moving forward. That's what I just heard. Right? We're moving forward, Mr. Barker.
No.
No?
Let me clarify. The poll was requested by the community. It's not required for the HOD to continue. It can inform the decision that the supervisors will make at the very end, but staff is making their own recommendation, the planning commission is making their recommendation, ARB is making their recommendation. So just one facet of the taken.
And do all those facets carry equal weight within the decision?
That decision is also made.
Or do
the decision is made by the board.
Okay.
I can defer to the board member if you'd like.
Okay. That's not very clear.
Not a politician either.
Okay, so
Let it go.
zoning regulations. I need to,
The best prices so far.
So the zoning regulations are hard and true. Right? Zoning regulations are hard and true. can't adjust this. So what is the relevance of 35 feet?
So the zoning regulations are regulations that are put in place and that have to be met. The current zoning regulation for the R3 zoning district has 2 height limits. Single family residences that are detached can go up to 35 feet. That's the maximum height limit. Any other principal structure within the R3 zoning district can go up to 60 feet. Staff is recommending to reduce the height of all other structures to meet the height limit of the single-family detached structures at 35 feet. Now, the design guidelines come in and work with property owners and design professionals, making sure that the proposed design is compatible with the neighborhood if the HOD is established. However, the height can never go beyond 35 feet, even if the design guidelines say, you know, it could be compatible with a 40-foot or 32 feet height, I'm sorry, 37 feet height, no, 35 feet is the maximum.
So today, 60 feet is the maximum.
Detached single family residences are 35 feet maximum. Any other structure, principal structure, permitted within the R3 zoning district can go up to 60 feet. There are other uses that are permitted within this district. So what we're proposing is to limit the height to 35 feet for those uses. But this neighborhood, to begin with, is fully established residential district. So, for example, if this school were in the HOD, let's say the HOD was established and the school was included in the neighborhood, in the HOD, in their current zoning ordinance, it could go up to 60 feet. But if the HOD were to be established, at that point, we don't need to go up to 60 feet, so we should get that 35.
Okay, so 35 feet is the highest.
The maximum that's permitted for a single family currently, and we're saying that should be the height limit for all principal structures. And that's our proposal. Currently, though, 35 and 60 is what's in the zoning ordinance.
For today, for the existing neighborhood, 35 feet is as high as it can go.
For yes. All other structures.
Okay. My home is capped out.
Final Jeopardy category today.
My home is capped out going back.
This children's book here, introduced in 1996, and a friend Richard gets the name from the sound he might make. 30 seconds, please.
Under current zoning ordinance, you cannot go above 35 feet. And the proposal is not to change that. We're not going to change the 35 feet.
Thank you for helping. So if this goes to board in 2023, what is the actual implementation time?
In terms of the zoning ordinance being effective, typically zoning ordinance amendments become effective at midnight the day after adoption. So the final action is by the Board of Supervisors. The next steps, as outlined in one of the slides, is we will need to go before the Planning Commission for a public hearing. There will be an opportunity. The public hearings will be scheduled. Every property owner will be notified, and you will have an opportunity to come to the meeting and provide comments. But the final decision would be the Board of Supervisors, the full board.
Okay. I think that's it. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Groska. I'm John Groska. Hi. I heard a lot of generalities about design guidelines. I think there's a lot of concern in the community about how the design, the proposed guidelines would affect particularities of any renovations and what you might want to do in homes. What are the design guidelines and where can I get that information?
So the question was, where are the design guidelines and where can they get that information? The draft design guidelines are currently online. Is there the latest version online? Yeah. Okay. So on the study webpage, when you go take the poll, the design guidelines are there. The poll inside the website information should be on your agendas. And also if you go to the county website and search Holmes Running Groups, it's there. So, but what they are there a list of, as Sarah Bonish mentioned, there are a list of recommendations that you can do to your property to help keep any changes in conforming, but in general alignment with the integrity of historic buildings.
And just to follow up, the proposed design guidelines will be used by the ARB, either approved or not approved, or proposed changes to the house. So the proposed guidelines are very important and key to this whole process. So that's why I'm asking, what are these guidelines? We haven't really seen that presentation.
Thank you. So the question was, we haven't seen them tonight. Sarah, how long are the design guidelines? No, I'm sorry. How long are the design guidelines? I think they're over 100 pages. 133. There's. Oh,
I just want to say the design guidelines chapter is a small portion of that. A lot of it is the history and developmental history and character defining features. So it is long,
but there is a. I'm sorry, I'm estimating here 20 pages or so on design guidelines alone that goes specific by roof shape, type of materials, that very specific. So when you're designing your addition, you have that in mind. You can use it. So that they're on the internet, and we didn't bring a copy of them tonight, but they're available. We can, if you put your name and number down on one of our staff, we can email it to you directly.
Yeah. I'm Micah Goodwin. I'm on Executive Avenue. There were 58 non-contributing properties, which approaches almost 20% of the houses. So those didn't meet your standard. And there's a couple properties near me that are adjacent to mine, same style house. They seem to have modest additions to them, and they were non-contributing. So it raises a lot of concern for me, but I want to know are there photographs and explanations of why these are non-contributing? Because it's a very surprisingly high number to me.
Yeah, sure. I can't answer that analysis tonight. As I mentioned, I'm stepping in for my colleague Denise Dressel. But when the staff report is published, you'll be able to see why each building was contributing or non-contributing. I just can't speak to specific examples tonight.
Our report actually has specific reasons for each property that the design guidelines. That's
in the appendix of the design guidelines, there are it says why they're contributing or not contributing. So.
For each house? Each individual house?
Yes, for each individual house. Yeah, another reason it's 132 pages.
Just a question about the Architectural Review Board governance. Is there, I'm not familiar with it at all. Is there any stipulations to avoid conflicts of interest? For example, are they, I assume it's architects on there. Are they barred from reviewing properties or being hired by the neighborhood?
Yes, the ARB is made up of 11 professionals. I think we have 4 or 5 architects. We also have architectural historians, archaeologists, and they're required to be in that profession. They do have to disclose any conflicts of interest that they have. So property ownership or financial gain, I believe it is that they have to disclose, but not if they're just an architect. That doesn't.
Can they be hired? Can they be hired by people in the neighborhood? In other words, that could be a selling point. I'll get you to the ARB if you hire me. And they might be, and a recusal to me is not enough. Because I can say, okay, I can't vote on this, but all my other friends on the board can. I can get you through. I mean, that's the kind of thing.
Yes, that's absolutely a conflict of interest. They cannot take part. They have to recuse themselves. We have members on the, one member of the board lives in Holland Hills, and he has to make a statement every time that he does not make any financial gain or anything like that. So, but yes, if they were working on the project, they wouldn't be able to participate.
I guess I'm saying it could be more than that. Even if they recuse themselves, if they're allowed to work on any project in the neighborhood, they still have clout with that board. So I'm not sure on the rules.
I think you're asking a legal question, and I'm not really sure I can respond to that. So if we get to that point, we can certainly do that.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned the poll. How are you, and I understand you're looking at IP addresses. How do you know somebody substitutes a vote for somebody else? Like they don't respond and someone else is going to vote for them and they don't know that. How do you know that? Okay.
Sarah, would you mind?
Yes, so if someone is in that scenario you described, someone's probably using the same IP address, and we will go by line to check where the duplicate IP addresses are. We've done this before. If there's any duplicates, we put them into another bucket and we look at the results.
Hello. Okay, so with the IP addresses that's connected to the Wi-Fi that you use. So if you were trying to take the poll for another person and you put in someone else's name and address, the IP address would be the same still. So that would get flagged. Right now, you shouldn't even be able to the way that we have it rigged. You shouldn't even be able to go through the whole process. If you're trying to take it again, it'll say you've already submitted it. So I mean, I don't know if you want to go borrow someone's laptop and try to take the poll in South Carolina. Maybe we could
go to a Starbucks, right?
There's probably a way around it. Where we live in an imperfect world, we will do the best we can, going through every single line item, looking for duplicates and putting those in a different bucket.
Okay, one more question. Thank you. Tear downs. I'm not planning to do a tear down, but I brought that up at one meeting, the first meeting, and it was like, yeah, you can do that if you're within certain, if your building meets requirements. And then I think it was the third meeting that said, no, you can't do that. You need it has to be a structural defect. And then I believe that was reversed again. So what is if you could explain the situation with tear downs?
So by tear down, you mean demolition of the existing? Okay. So if the building is contributing to the historic district, then you would have to get a building permit to demolish that, and that would come with the architectural review board. You'd have to prove why the building needed to be torn down, because if it's contributing, it's an integral part to the district. So if you have a demo permit, you'd have to come to the ARB to get it approved. The same thing with non-contributing structures, but the non-contributing structures wasn't deemed integral part of the district. You could demo that a little bit easier, and putting that in quotes, but it would still have to come to the ARB. The difference is that either way, you'd have to come to the ARB for your new construction as well. So there's two facets there. You've got to come to the ARB for your demolition, and you've got to come to the ARB for your new construction and get approval. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to clarify, there was some questions about the architectural enforcement. The members of the architectural review board are appointed by the board of supervisors. I quite frankly have not heard such discussion about the ARB. I don't think ever, except for tonight. There, as was explained, there are certain requirements for them to serve on the ARB. But also, once you are appointed by the board to serve on a board authority or commission, as the ARB is, you receive training, including Virginia's Conflict of Interest Act, which is very, very specific and pretty tight. Also, anybody who has a professional license, such as an architect, if they are in conflict, they could lose their license. In addition to that, they would lose their position on the ARB. And I will have to ask our ARB members, are you required to file a financial disclosure? No, you're not. Some of our boards, authorities, and commissions are required to file a financial disclosure. You are not. But you do have, a professional license is hard earned and is very important to keep. So I think that anybody on the ARB would be very, very aware of whatever conflict they might have, and they would recuse themselves, sometimes even to the point of leaving the room or not showing up at the meeting. So I just wanted to clarify that. I think they're very honorable people who are very understanding of conflicts of interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Gross.
Thank you. My name is Holmes. Yeah, I'll take it on both. Thank you. Simple question. One, can we opt out?
As of right now, no, you cannot opt out of the historic overlay district.
Okay. Second question is for the ARB. So the design guidelines, if you've all read through them, they're, I would say, pretty vague generally. So will the ARB be using precedent to approve projects in the future? So say, for example, 10 people in the neighborhood, if the HOD passes, go through, they have their projects approved, the ARB be looking strictly at the guidelines, or will they start using previous projects as precedent?
Mr. Dana, do you want to respond? Sorry. I mean, it's probably better coming from you.
Sure. You need me right here, right?
Yeah, just announce who you are.
Hi, everyone. Chris Daniel, Chairman of the Architectural Review Board. Looks like y'all can hear me, so maybe the mic likes me tonight. To your question, it's a little bit of both. Obviously, as many of you have observed, the guidelines are vague. They're deliberately vague because the ARB is composed of a bunch of different professions and practices, and each building case is unique. So I would treat it more like a guide to cooking, not a recipe. So we use that for how to cook in your historic district. So we want to know what techniques, what approaches are appropriate, but we'll also be looking at what is there. Now, that being said, we're not an aesthetics board, nor are we just a design review board. So just because something was built previously does not mean it is consistent with the historic overlay district guidelines that may be approved. This is something that obviously we've been working with Holland Hills. There are buildings and properties that are built there that were done previously that may have been approved by their design board, but may not be consistent with the guidelines that were now established. Now, I think I need to caveat that with saying, bringing up the question of conflict of interest and also the professions. We come from a wide array of backgrounds. Laura's right, we have 5 architects. We have an archaeologist, a landscape architect. We used to have an engineer. We may be getting a new one in the future. We have a lawyer, we have an architectural historian like myself, a historian. So we bring all our perspectives to this while looking at those guidelines to evaluate each project, recognizing that each one is a unique proposal by a homeowner or an applicant in that case for what you're trying to do with your home. So we're sensitive to that. We also, I'll throw this in here, we try to be the board of yes, not the board of no. I'm not a big fan of people coming back and forth to the ARB to be continuously told no. If you have a project, we want to try to help it work in conformance with those guidelines that we're being asked to uphold. That being said, you asked about conflicts of interest, just to touch on that. We've had several of those where board members, as a supervisor mentioned, we step completely out of the room or don't attend the meeting. I'm a federal employee as well, so there are plenty of instances when something intersects with federal projects, I leave. I'm not in the room. And just because we're all colleagues doesn't mean we like each other's stuff either. So I hope that answers your question. And obviously, when you do come, if this is an HOD, we do want to see what's built there in the district. We do like to look at existing examples because compatibility, not only with your house, but also with adjacent houses is an important thing to consider.
Thank you. Just one more question and a suggestion. So the question is, why are, you mentioned that mostly it's large scale renovation that will be required to in front of the ARB. Why are decks and front walkways on that? Because that's something that I can do myself. I don't need a permit to do that. I
can restone my front stoop. Do I now need to get a proposal, take it to the ARB to do something that I could do for less than $1,000 in a day?
The ARB operates in the criteria to go to the ARB is if a building permit is required. So if a building permit is required for the changes in your deck, you will need to come to the ARB. You need a front stoop and you need a permit. I think you need one for that, but you might. That's our requirement. So we check a lot of if proposals actually require building permits before making you go through the process.
Thank you. And then just a suggestion. The portion that you have written out about sustainability is very small. I think everyone's agreeing these houses are old and they're not sustainable. So things like brick foundations, probably doing addition to our house, which someday we probably will. I don't want a brick foundation. It's something that's not long-term sustainable. So if you could please just take a look at the sustainability requirements you have. I feel like they're very small. I will be happy to send suggestions because as we move forward, I think that it's important that our houses are able to last through the time. Thank you.
So just to clarify, the sustainability and the design guidelines, is that correct?
Correct, yeah, very small.
Okay, great, thank you.
Hello, I'm Edward Levine from Executive Avenue, the house that has been overtaken by the fig tree. And some of my questions might repeat others because my understanding is limited. If a project does not require a building permit, then the ARB does not have a role, if I understand.
The building, yes to a building permit, but there are other things that require it to come to the ARB. So it's not just the building permit, it's a site plan. So if you have grading or you put in a pool, or if you have a rezoning case, such as a special permit to encroach on your setbacks, those also come. So building permit is the most common one that will be in, but you can also need to come in for any, it's ground disturbance over 2,500 square feet. Okay, 2,500 square feet, or any rezoning cases such as special permits or variances.
Which may not require them.
Which not, thank you, which may not require a building permit, but because it's rezoning, it would need.
Would the HOD change what projects need a building permit?
No, because the building permit is determined by the Land and Development Services and the Building Permit Division. The HOD would be an add-on to the, or it would be another review in the building permit cycle. So you come for construction, you come for engineering, you come for materials, building, that type of thing. It would just be another review in them.
A couple of questions or comments on specific recommendations. On windows. The original windows, as you correctly note, had a metal frame that was very narrow. If you try to find that nowadays, you will go crazy. I know because I tried 2 years ago. And the only place I could find did not do residential windows. Moreover, the windows are a health issue. I once discovered that my boss lived in Holland Hills. And I mentioned to his wife that we lived here. And she said, "Oh, do you freeze in the winter too?" And the suggestions in the recommendations right now, I think, are uniformly ones that have failed. We have put, what do I want to say, vinyl shielding on the inside. We had exterior storm windows. I've never seen an interior storm window for the original ones here. And so finally, we had to face up to the fact that if we wanted windows that would actually keep us warm in the winter, we would have to accept the fact that the frames were going to be thicker. And at least in our case, perhaps the recommendations ought to take that into account and acknowledge the challenge.
Understood, and thank you for bringing up that example. If your proposal came to the ARB and you needed new windows, that's not building permits. You have to require a building permit first and then get new windows. But the ARB would be able to give you guidance and recommendations on what to do. Or you could propose something more innovative treatment. We've approved solar panels in historic overlay districts before. It's not meant to be preserved in amber or use every same material. If you come in with a reasonably good argument and say it's in conformance with the integrity of the neighborhood, then the ARB may approve the application. So it's not meant to be to make you freeze in the winter. It's supposed to be so you can live in your house but keep the aesthetic the same.
A second area of the recommendations, false historicism. The first thing to note is that as far as I know, while there are buildings in Holmes Run Acres that antedate Holmes Run Acres per se, there are no colonial era taverns to be preserved. There aren't even any Civil War era buildings. This is a neighborhood that was originally starter homes. They were designed to be added on to. And right from the start, they attracted a squirrely group of architects who went around adding on to their homes. Now, did they all do it so that you could tell where the original was and where the new was? Nonsense. And indeed, recently, there was one house on Holmes Run Drive that added and did not differentiate between the new and the old. For months, my wife and I would walk by it and say, oh my God, what's it going to look like? When they were done, we loved it. And does it really conform with the guidelines on historicism? No. Does it conform with what the original architect probably intended? I dare say it does. And has anyone complained about it? I doubt it. So there has to be a little bit of give there.
Understood. And that's why, as Mr. Daniel mentioned, the design guidelines are made on purpose, and architecture, as we all know, is subjective and in the eye of the beholder. So that's why when you come for your proposal, the design, there's wiggle room for you to negotiate. We have applications where the architects blatantly disagree with each other on what they think is best. So it's not meant to be kept in stone or permanent or hard. It's meant to be negotiation and mitigation. It's not supposed to be an absolutely not, no, that's ugly, move on. It's meant to be along with the design guidelines.
Final question starts with a confession. Unlike some of my neighbors, I have not watched all of the recordings of ARB discussion of Holland Hills. But I have seen over our listserv a variety of concerns raised by my neighbors that primarily say they seem picky as hell, and this person ended up having to have 2 or 3 meetings before finally getting through, and 2 or 3 meetings meant time lost and money spent. What are the criteria by which the ARB decides we can't reach a decision right away? You're going to have to come back in a month and make another presentation.
I too have watched all of the Holland Hills. With too much interest, I think. I will say that there's a lot of work that goes into the application before it gets to the ARB. And Denise Dressel, who's leading this project, is also the ARB administrator. So when you first submit your proposal, Denise does a quality control check and checks your application to see if you meet all of the general guidance that we give, submission of materials. Now, the ARB is free. There's no fee to come before the ARB, but the more outreach and communication you do with staff, the better your application is. We've had 2 or 3 I can remember in particular, applicants that came to the ARB 8 or 9 times because they weren't listening, they weren't submitting a complete package. And if it had been more outreach to the ARB, or I'm sorry, ARB staff, we would have been able to get it through much quicker. I want to say 75% of our applications go through a workshop first and then come for approval. So the workshop's like a feasibility meeting to get more guidance. And then the action item should be wrapped up when you come. So it should take 2 meetings at the most for them to get through.
Hi, Chris Daniel again, ARB chairman. So to speak to that, the ARB runs on Robert's Rules of Orders. So when an application comes for approval, there are only 3 options. And I, as a chairman, can't make a motion, but I have to seek a motion, either a motion to approve, deny, or defer. I will say the ARB in my time on it, and it's starting to get longer than I thought, has only denied 2 applications. And actually, we didn't even deny the last one, we just didn't approve it, which was taken as a denial. That being said, Laura's right, most of the applications that end up coming back multiple times are either for large, massive undertakings, such as the projects down with Laurel, the Lord Prison project, where you have a major developer doing something that's so complicated, it's just not possible. But for single family projects, in most cases, you're talking 1 workshop, 1 action item meeting. And we encourage workshops because there is a chance for a better dialogue between the board members and the applicant on what you might be seeking, what we might want to see when you come next time. What I will say is applications that do suddenly get shunted to a workshop, it's because they didn't talk to staff about what they were bringing, or they demanded coming in for an approval and then found out when they came in, the package was lacking things, and the ARB members summarily pointed that out and highlighted that we just don't have what we need to make an approval. It's not that we don't want to, but if we don't have that information, we just can't vote on it. For example, not having plans, not having architectural drawings when they're needed, not having material information, that stuff not being there, we just can't vote on it. As a board member, we wouldn't feel right passing that forward. But with a workshop, we usually are able to give guidance on here's what we would want to see when you come back for action. And just last month, there were several that came through workshop, and we pretty much told them if they bring the materials they have, they should probably expect approval.
Another question?
Final note. Really from you. Assuming this goes forward, and personally I hope it does. When you start looking at Holmes Run projects, remember that we are not Holland Hills. Holland Hills is and was a higher priced place that was not nearly as prone to having additions, not nearly as prone to needing them, because the materials, except for the windows, were probably of a higher quality to begin with. And give us a little bit of slack accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
How's everybody doing tonight? Flora, nice to meet you. County, thanks for coming. I'm Kevin Young. You might know me from being very loud on the listserv and being highly skeptical of this entire affair. And I live on Joan Court, 344A Joan Court. The house is topped. We have the Christmas sleigh on our roof at Christmas. I've got 3 questions for you all. So the first one is, and if you know me, you know that I'm cited normally with primary sources. So the first question is, the pictures on page 2 from 1951 and page 26 from 1969 in the most recent draft guidelines for Holmes Run Acres. The second picture is of Joan Court, which I know quite well since I do live there. Clearly illustrate that, broadly speaking, there was no original landscaping in Holmes Run Acres. If the initial condition on the neighborhood, if that was the initial condition of the neighborhood, then why are landscaping recommendations extensively covered in the guidelines today? For example, page 72 advises against landscape that is, quote, geometric in nature. Can you comment on that?
Sure, thank you, Sarah. Would you mind? Not as familiar with these.
Sure, I guess when you look at Holmes Run Acres, what really sets it apart when you look at the surrounding more colonial revival, larger developments, you have simple houses, consistent setbacks, just on top of the land. But when you look at Holmes Run Acres, you have varied setbacks that respond to the topography, different alignments of the houses. You have streets that are curvilinear to respond to the topography. So, well, when it was originally developed, plantings may have been sparse. It was an integral component of the original plan. So that's why the landscape and streetscape guidelines just provide recommendations for how to enhance and maintain that rather than extensive site grading that might eliminate those topographical relationships and the relationships between houses. So
where does geometric come from there?
I have to look at the specific guidance, but if you are looking at an English garden with—
It is on page 72 for reference.
Yeah, I'll go look. But listen, I'm here to take input and listen. I'll take another look and you know, provide any responses.
Sure. If you have very specific comments like that, we need you to email them to Denise.
I have.
Okay. Well, then when we do another draft of the design guidelines, we will review that comment at that point.
Cool. So Edward sort of stole my thunder on the second one here, but it is related to the false historicism part, which is language that I think was added sometime in the last 3 months or so. So the HRA guidelines recommend or do not recommend changing the design or operability of the original windows. That's on page 53. But also do not recommend, quote, designing new construction or additions in a, quote, false historic manner, matching the original building exactly, yada, yada, yada. You all know the language. That's on page 61. So can you explain with specificity where the proposal needs to fall between do not remove or change the operability of the original windows and do not install original windows?
I think you're getting to a very specific example, and I appreciate that. The design guidelines are meant to be recommendations and flexible. So on a case-by-case basis, if you need the window open for X reason, the ARB may determine that that's supportive. As long as you provide justification for why you need what you need changed, the ARB can make the determination on based on that. But I don't have an example to your specific circumstance.
Well, it's really, it's a whole spectrum, right? Between can't change them, they can't be original. Maybe you could help?
So the guidelines for the existing buildings, existing windows, these homes originally had fixed windows with sliding windows that were on the top or the bottom depending on the room and privacy and other considerations. They were aluminum, thin, and as we've heard, hard to replicate exactly to current standards. So the guidelines for existing buildings recommend retention of historic windows if possible, where they still exist even. I know a lot of them have been changed in the neighborhood. And where they do need to be replaced on the historic building mass, to replace them in kind to match or be compatible with those historic window designs. And there are good examples throughout the neighborhood and illustrated in the design guidelines. When we're talking about a new addition, and again, this is subjective and up to review by the board and decided on a case-by-case basis, but we're not saying don't install exactly the same windows. We're saying differentiate the new building, the new addition, and it could be very subtle or it could be a little more obvious, but there's nothing saying you have to put historic windows back or you can't put historic windows back. I'm not quite following that part.
Did you have another question?
Where I just want.
Okay, well, I don't want to belabor this too much.
No. It's in general about the design guidelines. So I think Laura pointed out that there's a lot of recommendations that have to be made for this to go through the full process, including the zoning commission, as well as the ARB actually takes up this action and makes a recommendation to the board of supervisors as well. You also saw in there that the ARB provides our feedback on the design guidelines, but we want that to go through an extensive community involvement process as well as a process through staff before we do that, because it would seem presumptuous on my behalf if the guidelines were just given to us and we then said, here's what we want to see in the guidelines. We first want staff to be informed by all of your input, including questions like yours. And then even in our meeting, if this does come to vote and consideration by the ARB, we have a chance for public opinion and or public comment on those decisions. And we would also seek input from the members of the public at that time too. We've only had 2 new HODs recently. Obviously, Wellington at River Farm was a pretty small thing, so it didn't really have a lot of public input in comparison to the Holland Hills. But in that instance, we did have input provided at our meeting, the ARB's meeting, which was also a public meeting. So I would continue to encourage yourself and any other community members to provide copious feedback about these guidelines so that folks know where those concerns are, because that's something I will take into account when I'm reviewing them along with my colleagues. Did I get you?
Thank you. Do you have another question?
Sure. That's a good transition to my third question, which is about the scope here. So before Holland Hills, and actually I just learned there were 15, I thought there were 14. There were 14, before Holland Hills was added, it's the 15th historical overlay district. The average residential block count was less than 10 per residential area. So if the HOD passes, that tacks on 350 additional residential units in addition to the 450 from Holland Hills. So that would be a 650% potential increase in the demand for building permits that the ARB has to pass. So given the ARB meetings already routinely last longer than 4 hours and permits are taking 2 to 3 months to pass, what is the county's plan to 6x the output of approved permits?
Thank you. And that's something we're definitely facing with the implementation of Holland Hills right now. We have had a lot of meetings with the HOD for Holland Hills when we approved in March. So we've had 3 ARB meetings, maybe 4, and we've had about 15 Holland Hills applications that have come in since that time. We do have flexibility to change the amount and timing of the ARB meetings, so they need to happen more frequently. But we will take it as it comes. We can't anticipate how much the caseload is going to increase. As you mentioned, there's very limited residential in the other 14 historical overlay districts. So you're correct, we're aware of that, and we'll be reanalyzing that in a couple months with Holland Hills.
Just listed that position.
Oh, yes, we do have a number of staff coming on as well. We have a senior heritage resources planner starting next month, and we have 2 junior ones coming shortly. So we're getting additional staff as well.
He said only one.
I'm sorry, what?
He said only one.
No, that's incorrect. That might have been a specific position. We have a history commission liaison starting August. I answered that question, and unfortunately we can't see crystal ball and see how many are coming in. I understand it's a 650% increase. The ARB is well aware of that. We have limited time, we have added more staff, and we have flexibility to adjust meetings and frequency of meetings accordingly. We just will not start having meetings to have meetings in case some come in. So, but we do have senior heritage resources planner, we have a junior heritage resources planner, and we have a limited term heritage resources 3 positions coming in the next few months.
So would that place any kind of bottleneck on the ability to workshop with the ARB, or for Denise to actually review the permits in that process, which I was unaware of until you said it prior?
Yes, one of the positions is specifically for ARB support. So we'll have another full-time position for that. I'm sorry, the second one was, second question.
Second question was, will that impede our ability to go to the workshop, given that you all have finite time?
It depends. We have time restrictions at the meetings.
Six questions, sir. 6. You said 3.
Thank you. We're almost. Sir, if you wouldn't mind. Understood. Thank you. There are a ton of questions on Holland Hills, and it's very convoluted. So we've got plenty of time. I think we still have about 20 minutes left. Commissioner Fox.
Time for workshops.
Thank you. We have time limited for workshops and action items. So if you come to the ARB the first time, you have 8 minutes to speak. If you're coming at the second time, you have 3 minutes to speak. We've streamlined that a lot, especially since Holland Hills has started, as noticed. And then we're also limiting how much time you can have for workshops, so about 30 minutes at the most for presentation and discussion. So we are aware of that. We're actually implementing it with Holland Hills. So by time that Holmes Run Acres does get approved, we will be ready to roll.
Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Okay, sir.
Hi, I'm Keith Gardner, Hemlock Drive. You answered a question that I was going to ask about. I was thinking maybe Supervisor Gross would be the person to answer it, but how you were going to increase resources as you get this additional workload. But I also was wondering, what about the ARB? That you've got an incredibly increased workload. What's the ARB going to do? I said, what's the ARB going to do to increase its resources?
I'm very happy to hear you're concerned about me, actually. So Laura's talked about it a little bit. Yes, with the addition of a new HOD, we did see an influx. They actually did some calculations on how many building permits happened in Holland Hills that would come to us on an average. And I think everybody decided to rush to us once it got listed as a HOD. So we've seen a quick influx. I'm hoping that's going to taper. But to your question, as chairman, I've been working with my members to streamline the meeting process. Now, obviously, we've been meeting virtually since March of 2020, which has created a lot more challenges. And eventually that will change. And I think it'll be a little easier when it's an in-person meeting, because conducting meetings virtually does mean there's a lot more lag. There's a lot more time challenges, folks setting up, putting presentations on, learning how to use all the fun technology instead of just standing in a room with a couple folks. So that's one thing that I think will be improved. I'm glad that it was brought up, because I'm going to continue to advocate to the Board of Supervisors that we get the support and heritage resources to provide staff reports to us and provide information in advance. Because you're right, we don't have an infinite amount of time for each ARB meeting. So we try to prioritize how those meetings are run. I meet with staff a week before to talk about applications coming in. We try to arrange the agenda in a way that is considerate, particularly of applications coming in. So if they're very simple applications, I want them in the front of the queue. I don't want them sitting around waiting for all the discussions. For workshops, I'm just going to be honest, workshops are at the end. So if a workshop comes in, it's a more intimate conversation. You're going to have to wait till the applications for voting go through. That's just how it is. But we're trying to prioritize that. I'm only chairman for 1 more year, and I think my terms are up. I have to step down. I can only run for 4. But any successor is going to have to continue running it like a tight ship. That's just, my wife will tell you that's how I want things running, because she gets frustrated when I can't put the kids to bed.
Me too. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, hi, I'm Pete Ketter. I live at 79 Holmes Run in front of Sycamore. And I have the misfortune of having one of the few houses in the acres that can see both of our new eyesores. Now, when this was originally proposed, I was very enthusiastic about it, because I thought, wow, maybe we'll never have any more of this in the acres. But my assumption was just like that we would have architectural drawings or something go to the review board, thumbs up, thumbs down, for like tear downs, new construction, and big add-ons. But what we're doing now is getting down into the weeds. And I don't know if I'm with that. When I bought my place in the acres 30 years ago, and I may be speaking for a lot of people, long-term residents here, one of my absolute musts that I told my wife is we are not going to live in a neighborhood with a homeowners association. And what this sounds like is that Fairfax County is going to be our homeowners association. And after 30 years of no homeowners association, I don't think I'm going to accept that now. One other thing too is about the houses we call non-conforming or conforming. A Supreme Court justice once said about pornography, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. There's a lot of what you guys call non-conforming houses in the neighborhood that I think are wonderful. And I don't know why you decide that, hey, this is not going to work. If that person tried to build that house now, you tell them no. I mean, there are items on my own house
it would probably be shot down by the folks now. For example, I have a metal roof. According to the guidelines, no, that doesn't work. Well, I hate to say this, but the metal roof weighs 10% of the tar and gravel, and it's also much more thermally effective than that. But there are a whole lot of other reasons. But I just was worried about the long-term people that are worried about homeowners associations, and much less having the homeowners association being the government. So.
Thank you very much. I will say to your comment, this is a community sought endeavor. There's a community survey done.
And as I said, I was all for it first until I found out detail.
Agreed. So that's why we voted then for it. So then we go through the feasibility and what it entails. And this is what this whole process is about. So thank you.
But now this poll has absolutely no legal validity. That we have no say in it. We have nothing. It's going to go to the political hack over in Fairfax County. And we had no say.
So okay, first of all, the poll, time out. The poll is for the community. The community asked for the poll. It's not a legal requirement for county staff to do the poll.
That's fine.
Okay, if you let me continue. Right, so do your vote in the poll, please do. And then the ultimate decision, as I said, goes to the Board of Supervisors. There's multiple times between now, as Mr. Daniel mentioned, at the ARB, you can come speak against it. You can go to the Plan Commission, speak against it, and you can go to the board to speak against it. There's no guarantee that this is going to be approved whatsoever. We just have to do the report to actually present the information. And then from there, that's how everybody gets their information. So that's what we're doing right now, providing the report as required by the zoning ordinance, as asked for by the community for the feasibility. And if you don't agree with it, vote in the poll and speak at the public hearing.
David Heckman, 7705 Poplar Tree Lane. I'll disclose that I was a work group member. A question about development patterns varying across the neighborhood. There are some streets that are pristine, and neighbors rightly are concerned foremost about the loss of what they have. There are other parts where we have tear downs every 2 years, where the majority of houses are not going to be contributing in just a very short time, and where people have had their beautiful renovations compromised by houses of 8,000 square feet or higher in just a mishmash of styles. So I think the threats to our neighborhood are very different depending on where you live, and I hope if you see a real divergence in community opinion, that there might be a way to look into that when you consider the ultimate boundaries. I know there's no precedent, but I'd like to at least tentatively ask if you do observe differences between parts of the neighborhood in terms of the development.
I unfortunately cannot speak to that. Denise would do a much better job at Sarah. I don't know, don't feel like you have to, but we can address that and get back to you. I'm sorry, I'm pinch hitting tonight, so I don't have in-depth analysis on that.
And I have a second question that's
Sure.
much more specific.
Regarding false historicism, I think we all get it when it comes to Mount Vernon. If you're building like a visitor center, maybe do it modern rather than confuse people with something that looks like George Washington designed it. But with our houses, I think even work group members are confused, and I was confused until I heard your predecessor, former chairman John Burns, explain that in a neighborhood like this, you can generally comply just by shopping at Home Depot or IKEA rather than an architectural salvage shop. I wanted to see if you agree with that characterization or whether you'd like to elaborate on that.
Chris Daniel again. No, I think our former chairman, who just like me got in the situation of serving 4 years and then had to step down as being chairman, is right that with a false historicism, a lot of it's going to be about materials and about seeking to get into that position of, I want it to look as though it was built there originally. And that is a lot of what, when I interact with false historicism in my professional career, it's an attempt to create a lie. It's not an attempt to complement or build in the same style or character of. And I think that it's an important thing to emphasize with the ARB board is the fact that we do have several architects of well recognition in the county who also we debate about that subject of, is this creating a false historicism or is it a complementary design? And I think in the end, we've usually settled with most of them saying that we've achieved that successfully. It's usually when someone comes and says, well, we're going to use the brick that I salvaged from the demo building over here. I found these old windows and it'll look like it was if you had just come in there in the 1950s and it looked just like this, the same structure. That's not what we want. That's what we're striving against. A homeowner proposing something unique, but also not so unique that it overwhelms the building. That's the big thing we're now pushing for.
Why are you not in favor?
Not in favor of. I'm not in favor of someone using a pile of old bricks to build a fake Holmes runs acres home. If you because it isn't preserving. So I think that's one of the key things that maybe is sometimes overlooked, and perhaps some of the comments from a gentleman before. The Architecture Review Board is here to preserve the integrity of Holmes Runs Acres due to its significance as a historic collection of historic properties. That is our job. That is what we've been charged for by the Board of Supervisors to do with all of the HODs in our care, as well as other historic properties in the county. We're looking to preserve those remnants of our history and keep them in a way that they can continue to be interpreted. If you take something that was not there and sell it off as being there, that's when we get into a conflict. Reusing old brick to help repair an existing historic building, that's fine. Reusing old brick to create a building that's supposed to be a faux historic building, that's where you get to the challenge. I also want to advocate that I don't want to be your HOA. I definitely don't. So, and I think my other members would speak to that. But obviously, as Laura said, this is a community process that then goes through a public process, which has several votes on it and recommendations. We're going to take all that into account. When we held the last public meeting on both the two HODs, we took into account all public comments before our members voted. So I want to be transparent on that. As the supervisor said, we're appointed and we're there to uphold that duty, and I want to continue to uphold it honorably.
Hypothetical, sorry. Holmes Run Acres architects were early historic preservationists. I think they built modern houses in the middle of historic districts that they themselves landmarked in Colorado. So they get it. But one specific example is they did use salvage brick from Baltimore, I think. Yeah. Same as Holland Hills, I think. Could be an urban legend. I hope that you would consider that specific example, yes, maybe, as the architects did that themselves.
I think we would.
So once again, the case by case basis.
Understood. Thank
you. Jonathan Bromley, I live on Sycamore Drive. I originally was going to ask how we got here. Now
Come closer. This was Zoom, yeah, but this is a Zoom meeting.
Originally, I was going to ask how we got here. And now I've learned that we got here from a survey that was conducted 3 or 4 years ago. I'd only been here for 2 years, so I wasn't obviously part of that process. At what point did we lose our rights to control our own community in terms of regulations, what we can do? Can I ask my question, sir? Yes, again, I'm sorry. It was my first one. Yes, I know. Okay. You never lose. At what point do we lose our rights in the process, and what steps as a community can we take to reject it or to counter this process?
Sorry. Thank you for that. As I mentioned earlier, it's probably going to be a 4-year process, just like Holland Hills was. COVID did not do any favors to that. We had to put everything on pause. We also had a couple of staff changes. So I had a similar challenge. I can only speak to Holland Hills, but I did have a similar challenge when people move into the neighborhood after the original survey was done. This is your opportunity to speak. At the community meetings, at the ARB meetings, at the planning commission, speak to Denise Gressel, reach out with comments, provide comments. The more you contact us and talk to us about what you would like or would not like to see, that's what we take into account.
That wasn't my question.
You don't want to see it at all, give it up, but you're gonna see it.
No, maybe closer?
No, can I follow up one more second?
Sure.
I will say this too, the ultimate decision maker is the Board of Supervisors. If you come out in force, support, or against, they will take that into account. Okay, that's part of their job, right, Supervisor? So make your feelings known. That's what we're here for. There's no pre-decision that this is going to be approved. We are doing our jobs as the community requested us to do. The feasibility has been drawn out by COVID. So I understand the frustration, but
be sure you vote in the poll. It's very important. Yes or no, or no opinion. Don't just ignore it. Vote, look at it.
Okay, so it sounds like this started based on a survey request and a study. Since the county is going to make a decision about what me and some of the owners are going to be able to do with our property, and Virginia is a property right state, what compensation or tax break or other incentive are we going to receive for the loss of the use of our land?
that's a great question. There is no tax incentive for living within a historic overlay district. It's upon vote of the supervisors in the community. And the thing about the historic overlay district and the guiding principle is the historic nature and integrity of the structures. If the buildings do not have that and the community does not support it, it will not move forward. So this process and community meetings, poll, everything, you have to let us know that you don't support it. And I want to reiterate again, there is no preconceived notion that this is going forward to be approved until the supervisors gets there. And we might have a year, we might have 6 months, might have a long time, but Holland Hills got delayed 3 or 4 times because of community concerns. So
community concerns at Holland Hills is still going to improve, right? It's still going to pass. So it's not representative of the community, it's representative of the board. So as somebody who's opposing that, I only have 12.5% stake in whatever that decision, right? You're only taking 25% of the poll. Yes, no, 12.5, right? Like that's not community representation.
I'm sorry, I don't understand your math, but
I asked earlier what stake the poll has, but you said roughly a quarter, right? So if we're split as it appears that we are, then what my vote actually counts for is 12.5% of the entire decision. That's not community.
The poll is for the community. I can't reiterate this enough. There is no legal requirement for the poll. It is a community outreach tool, okay? The vote that you have is to go to the public hearings and speak your concerns to the elected officials. That's your opportunity to make yourself known and heard. So the poll, once again, is for the community benefit. The staff will be making their recommendations, and then you speak at the public hearings. I can't, because as staff, and Denise Dressel too, we can't do anything about your singular concern. We have to hear in mass the changes made and actually communicate that to the supervisor. Understood. Okay, very quick.
I just have a comment then, and I won't ask any more questions. One thing I would ask to be considered during this process is over the last 2 or 3 years, the market has exploded. Me and a lot of other people that have bought homes in here, people have lived here for 40 or 50 years and took advantage of selling their home during a very hot market. For me and for a lot of people, our life savings are put into these homes and we still have to borrow a ridiculous amount of money to move into, in my situation, a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom home. One thing I would just ask everybody to consider, at least at the zoning level, is that a lot of our value is in our land and our ability to sell to a full market of demand and not just a select few people who are willing to take the money, the time, and the resources to go through preserving these houses. So I just like that to be considered, that the fact that this is huge investments for a lot of people. And that's kind of a big deal for a lot of us. So thank you.
Understood. Thank you.
My name is, could you come over here so they could, I'm Jennifer, I live on Holmes Run Drive. My question is about the non-contributing homes, which since that's 20% of it, what is the difference in the decision-making process and what leeway are those homeowners given in the process, given that we cannot necessarily conform to the guidelines?
The big difference, as I mentioned, I can't speak to the individual significance of why each building was contributing, non-contributing. However, if there were changes made, additions made, and it sounds like they're in the appendix of the design guidelines and also be in the staff report. So if you have a specific question about those properties. The difference that is, as I mentioned earlier, is if you decide to demolish the structure. So if you demolish the structure and it's contributing, it's got a little bit more of an impact and significance than a building that's a tear down next door that's non-contributing. So that's the affordance it allows. The contributing and non-contributing status, anytime you do an addition in the neighborhood, you need to take in, as Mr. Daniel mentioned, the view sheds of the surrounding property. So because it's a complex in the neighborhood and community, we can't separate out the view shed from one neighborhood to another because you can all see each other's conflict. Although it is 20%, it's not 20% in one corner. And in historic overlay districts, both the National Register level and local levels, we can't do something called a Swiss cheese effect, where you can just say, this one's not in, this one's not in, this one's not in, but they're surrounded by contributing structures. So I hope that helps a little bit.
I guess, but just a quick follow-up. That, I mean, that those homeowners should not be penalized in any way if they want to make an addition or a change to their home.
If they need a building permit, even if they're non-contributing structure, they will be required to come to the ARB, even if it's a non-contributing structure. Well, I think we're right on time. At 9. Oh, I'm sorry, sir.
Hi, that's my wife of 25 years. I'm just gonna, yeah, that's my wife of 25 years. Anyway, we own the A-frame. We own the A-frame. Okay, I'll tell you something. I love my neighbor, but that gentleman there also was quite pissed off when he went up the height that he did. And this is the reason why I'm supporting this, because then the other building that's up at the front of Holmes Run is also too high. So I don't understand. This is my 5th home. So I'm aware of all the issues of that. We also own a historic building in Georgetown, 3 floors. So we understand the historic ramifications of what we're talking about. You must really think about your property as a historic place and not complain to government. You always have the right to do what you want. Just go with the guidelines. I don't see what the problem is. My neighbor didn't go with the guidelines and he did it legally. I love him. He's a great neighbor. However, I can't see the sunlight. I can't see the sunset. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. I appreciate your comments and feedback. Once again, if you have any questions, please, I would please email me, Russell, if she's made point of contact, her email and phone number on here. You can also contact me, but I will be sending it to her. So please send it to her first. Thank you all for your time tonight. I appreciate it. Thank you.